and I've been doing this with other guests just to show you a little bit of what Jimmy does and who he's been playing with. So I'm just going to share my screen before we introduce him and just give you a quick demo of some of the stuff Jimmy's been up to. Here we go. Hopefully you can see all this. That's Jimmy on the bass.
My treasure chase, golden grand piano, my beautiful steel. I leave it all lovely. My acres of land I have achieved. It may be hard for you to stop and believe the thing. I leave it all. You take out girl, multiply you by 4. Now a whole lot of woman needs up. Serve to the butterfly lounge, serve to be lady. Big boy, come around to down the garden, and baby. Criticize, what's to my braces? Why in the hole that goes around, it burns all my face.
So that was a bit of Jimmy in action, just a few artists that he's played with. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our special guest this morning, who's going to sort of talk his journey through with you all and, like I say, answer any questions you've got, and just, like I say, remind you that you are the future. So without all that, we won't be, creating new musicians without you here. So ladies and gentlemen, can I introduce the wonderful Mr. Jimmy Sims? There he is. Hey.
Hello.
Hello, mate.
How are you doing?
So, Jimmy, thanks for joining us. I'm being a bass player nerd myself. This is the one I've really looked forward to, because obviously it's great to catch up with old friends anyway. But we've just played them, obviously, some of the clips, and we'll talk about who you've performed with and how you've got on this amazing journey that you've done. Yep. But I just thought, just to give this some context to our students, we just go back to the beginning a bit, really, and just thought if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, which school you went to, and how you what you got involved in school that sort of started you on this kind of journey, really, and what you did after school and how it all kind of came about, really.
Okay, yes, no problem. I've just realised, looking through those clips myself, it's 3 different clips, 3 different haircuts, 3 different lengths of beard. Does anybody recognise? I'm not sure I recognise myself in some of those. Anyway, so I'm from Solihull. I was born in Solihull Hospital, and I lived in Alton. I grew up in Alton. I went to Kyneton Green Infant School, then Langley Juniors, and then Langley Seniors as well. I assume they're all still called the same thing. Yeah. And I was very lucky. We had a piano when I was growing up in our house. In fact, I've got it here now, down in London. And I was able to start just piano lessons when I was about 6. And then through the Solihull Music Service, when I got into school, I started learning the trumpet when I was about 9 or 10. And then I was desperate to pick up a guitar. And I did the same thing that a lot of bass players do, in that, I had a bunch of friends and everybody wanted guitars for Christmas. And we didn't have, and nobody wanted to play the bass. So I thought, well, I'll be the bass player. So that was me. It was sort of by default, but I totally fell in love with the instrument. I got that when I was, I think I was 14. maybe 13, 14 when I first got the instrument. And that was when Richard, Mr. Jones, first started. I assume it was when you first started at Langley. It would have been like 94.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I started lessons with Rich, and and then of course, being the only bass player in my year at school, I was automatically in the band, in the school band. Then with the encouragement of Rich and the opportunities that we got to go to a local studio, it was called Rich Bitch. I don't think it's there anymore, unfortunately, but
where it was originally is gone, but I think they have reopened, but it's not, I don't think it's as big as it was in those
they still got all the weird fish tanks in there and the sort of lizards and stuff. That was slightly disturbing, but yeah. And we used to put on gigs in the school. Rich was really involved in sort of getting us into the musical community and the performing arts community in the school. So we backed definitely a musical of the Blues Brothers. I'm sure there was another one. And then we'd put on performances and stuff like that. So, you know, giving us studio experience, live experience, and then individual instrument lessons really encouraged us to sort of see what a career in music could look like. In fact, he even put on my first gig outside of school, which was in a place called JB's, where it wasn't
Solihull Moors Football Club now. That is.
That's it. It's down near the Land Rover Works.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I remember that well because I remember being incredibly nervous, but playing the gig. But my lasting memory of it was Richard's band, your band, played after us. And it was just incredible. I don't think I'd ever heard such a sound. You know, I was probably only sort of 15 or 16. I'd not been to a sort of a gig like that. Oh, somebody's having audio issues. So they're leaving and coming back. So yeah, and then until I'd picked up the bass, I'd always wanted to be an artist or a graphic designer or something like that. But bass kind of got me hooked. And I think, again, through Rich, I heard about this idea of being a session musician or being a freelancer. And I liked the idea of being able to play all sorts of different styles of music. I kept getting in bands and I kept getting bored. Like, you'd go to a rehearsal every week and you'd play the same songs. So I like the idea of, well, I've got 3 bands on the go. So, you know, I can learn lots of different songs and things like that. It was, that was a little bit more exciting. So I decided that that's what I wanted to do. I went on to Solihull College, which is Blossomfield Road, is it?
Yeah, still there, yeah.
Yeah, wicked. And I was one of the first years we did, or I think I was the second year they were doing a BTEC in pop music and performance, and met a bunch of friends there. And of course, Solihull College gets kids from, like, you know, Dorridge and Knowle and all that, but also into Birmingham itself. So that opened up avenues into a whole bunch more bands and, you know, playing with different people and things like that. And in fact, I think it was from there that I got one of my first paid gigs, playing in a blues band, which I can't for the life of me remember what it was called, but it was a blues band with a load of older guys. And they said, do you want to come and do this gig? I would have been 17. Do you want to come and do this gig? Yes. All right, it's in this pub, so you're going to have to tell them that you're 18, which I don't recommend, obviously. I'm not endorsing doing that. But, I don't think I knew I was getting paid. And then at the end of the night, I got 20 quid and I couldn't believe it. I thought I was, you know, I thought it was, you know, I was the king of the world. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, it just became sort of addictive after that, sort of getting into different bands, getting into different scenes, meeting different people and playing different music. That's my early years, I suppose. But I was very lucky with Langley because it was so performance arts. And I think it still is performing arts focused.
Yeah, like a lot of secondary schools, the arts have been under real pressure in the last sort of 10 years with cuts to the curriculum and things like that. And this is, you know, why we're trying to do these sessions, you know, just to remind people and make sure we keep kids engaged in the arts and music and things. It's, you know, Langley is still considered a performing arts school, but it's again, like with a lot of secondary schools, it's had its fair share. So, I mean, going back to that, Jimmy, so you're obviously really lucky, getting out, playing live, sort of inspired you, having lessons and all that sort of culminated in, you thought this idea, I'm going to go to session musician. You obviously went off to college and did that. So after you finished college, what was the sort of the next calling point? Because obviously you moved up north for a little while.
Yeah.
So where did you go on from there? How did it start to sort of take off for you in terms of what was the next step?
Well, what was interesting for me, which is going to be different for the students now, is when I was coming up, this would have been 98, 99, there were about 2 or 3 degree courses, pop music degree courses. There weren't very many going around. So I thought I wanted to try and apply to those. But I'd worked out that you know, hey, I'm doing gigs and I'm getting money, you know, this is great, sort of thing. I had a girlfriend that was doing the pop music course in Salford, which was one of the best ones going at the time. And that was, so Salford's near Manchester. So I moved up to Manchester and just got involved with, so I sort of had the student experience without actually getting the degree. It was funny. So, you know, got involved with all of her mates and started playing in their bands and things like that. The great thing about being a bass player is, you know, there's not that many of us. And pretty much at the time, maybe not so much now, but every single band needed a bass player. So I could be working, you know, 4 or 5 nights a week and earning some pretty decent money playing in Irish pubs. There used to be a great jam band scene up there, so you could get stuck in with sort of improvisation nights and stuff. Yeah, it was.
When you moved up to Manchester, of course, around that time, that was a really big scene as well, of course, with, you know, with Oasis and everything coming out of the Manchester scene at the time. It seemed to be the sort of hotbed for musicians and bands, didn't it, at the time when you were there as well? So there was
Totally.
Yeah.
I think that I arrived as, like, you know, the Oasis had turned up, and I think there were a good few. Elbow were just about coming out of Manchester at the same time, and so all the record labels and A&R people were sending people up to Manchester to go and look for bands, and of course, you know, being involved in all of that, being involved in the bands, there were a lot of opportunities.
And Jimmy, when you were in Manchester, again, this is sort of mainly for our students, really, did you have to really sort of put yourself out there and do loads of different type of playing? So it wasn't just that I was going to be in a band playing pop music. Did you have to sort of go out and do the jazz stuff? Did you have to go and do the jamming sessions, the Irish stuff you said? You know, I think it's quite important that students realise these days that you can't just sort of almost settle into one sort of type of music. I think you have to sort of really go out and play loads of different things, and that helps develop your skills. Was that something you had to do when you were sort of learning your craft, if you like, in Manchester?
Absolutely. In fact, Manchester was pretty, because there was a big jazz scene there, and I'm by no means a full-on jazzer, but I definitely had to sort of raise my game, start learning to read charts and stuff like that. Learning to read chord charts and working out how stuff is. So I'd answer that by sort of twofold. It was like, yes, I definitely tried to do as many different things as I possibly could and educate myself in as many different ways as I could, but at the same time recognizing what my strengths were. And, you know, if a gig came up, say, playing, in fact, there was a bunch of mates of mine that used to play Cuban music, and gigs came up playing with them, and it was like I very quickly realised that playing salsa and you know, Buena Vista Social Club style stuff, that wasn't my bag. So it was like, all right, okay. So it's a matter of trying to sort of explore all the avenues that you can, or all the avenues that I could, and make yourself as versatile as possible, but at the same time realizing what your strengths are and trying to play to your strengths. But yeah, putting yourself out there is there's no room for embarrassment.
Absolutely. And you touched upon something that seems to be quite a common theme through this, the importance of being able to read. And I suppose, especially in your line of work now, I think any musician that wants to become a session player, or you know, of any ilk really, to have those note reading skills and those chord reading skills, I think are really essential, aren't they? Because as soon as that red light goes on, you need to be able to do the job, I guess.
Well, I think the idea is, for me, that you know, you don't know what you're going to get called to do. You've got no, you know, I turn up at a session these days, I've got no idea. So I need to go prepared, and as prepared as I can possibly be. I might be asked to just listen to something and play some bass. So I need to keep my ear training up, and I need to make sure that I can, you know, hear something and be able to play it within, you know, a few minutes. I have been presented with, you know, a huge amount of dots. And I'm not the best. I'm ashamed to say it, Rich. Please don't get upset with me that I've not carried on the reading. But yeah, my dot reading is my stave reading is not the best, but I can get by. I can get by a lot better than a lot of other people. But it's you don't know what you're going to come up against. So it's being versed in all sorts of different ways of reading or getting music across.
And again, I think that's really important to stress that, you know, you have to develop everything, don't you? So even if everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and I think, you know, by really honing in on those strengths, you know, your musical ear is obviously one of your major strengths, and being able to sort of do that. So if there's areas you're playing or of your musicianship that you're not so strong on, you have to really work hard at those other areas that can help compensate for that sometimes as well.
Absolutely. And I think starting out, that, you know, starting out, you've just got to do as many different things as you possibly can. There's room to specialize later on, you know.
And again, that seems to be quite a common thing that's come out of these sessions, really. And I think it's really important for our students to know that you need to just try everything. Don't just hold yourself back, and then you know, you can make those sort of decisions, which we're going to go into in a minute with yourself later on down the line. But unless you actually put yourselves out and sort of get out of your comfort zone, you know, we're talking with Mike, the guitarist, who's now touring in the West End. He fell into it by playing guitar in a gospel church. That's you know, and it was, I was fascinated to hear all that kind of story. So again, if it's something we can stress enough, it's to students, is to just get out there and play as many different things as you can. So moving on then, James, you obviously hit the Manchester scene and things like that. So then obviously the pull from London. Now, I take it when you were in Manchester, you were obviously doing a lot of playing for bands. Did you start doing session work in Manchester, or was that when slightly later on when you started moving down to London?
It depends what you call session work. I sort of, there weren't necessarily opportunities to do like recording sessions, so to speak, unless you were in bands, if that makes sense. There weren't solo artists looking for musicians, you know, stood on the corner sort of thing. But, you know, in Manchester, I definitely started, I did a few radio shows. I got into the jam scene really heavily, started running my own jam night. And because that was a great way of meeting other musicians, and just, and also being, if a jam is completely, the stuff that I used to like doing was completely improvised, which it completely disarms everybody. So, you know, everybody's ego goes out the window, and you've just sort of got to get on, and it's quite a bonding experience with other musicians. So no, it was very much when I got to London that the more sessiony stuff, the more sort of traditional session musician stuff would have started. So
what made you sort of move down to London? What was the sort of light bulb moment for you? So you've been in Manchester, and like I say, you were doing well, you're getting some work and things. What sort of thought, right, I'll make that decision to go down south and see what other work was available?
I think it was, I started looking for agents and managers and things like that were around at the time. And at the time, when I started looking, it was really obvious that that everybody was in London. There weren't people. It's different now, I believe, but at the time, you had to be within the M25 to start getting this work. There was a lot of work going on in the early 2000s. You know, there were a lot of TV shows, which there aren't today. There was Top of the Pops, CD UK, SMTV, you know, Jules Holland. There were so many on a Saturday morning. You could fill up an entire Saturday morning doing 3 or 4 gigs in a week. So, and they were all filmed in London. So there were a load of agents down there booking musicians for them. There were a load of musicians doing them. So it was kind of, it just felt like the obvious choice. Do you know what I mean? And there are a lot more recording studios down in London. There certainly were a lot more recording studios down in London than anywhere else in the country. So it just sort of made sense for me to come down here. And as you can probably tell by my weird accent, is that I, as much as I was born in Solihull, my family's all from London, and all from East London actually. And so I'd visited here quite a lot, so I felt quite at home, and it was the logical choice for me. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. So you moved down to London, and obviously looking at your bio, you sort of started working at the Base Centre, which I know very well.
Mm-hmm.
And is that when you sort of, obviously, because moving from Manchester to London is a big step. How did you start making contacts in London to start, that sort of career for you? Was it working at the Base Centre and meeting people, or did you just put your name out there? Did you get yourself an agent? How did you sort of start that journey in London, which led to the career that you've obviously you've got now?
So again, I'll tell you the route that I took, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Again, in the early 2000s, there weren't so many colleges again offering degree courses, but again, one of them was a place called Base Tech, which I don't believe is there anymore, which was in Acton, West London. So my idea was I'll go and join that course. So I got my student loan, and I moved down, and everything was going swimmingly until I missed the first 2 weeks of the course because I'd got the dates wrong. Which, Rich, knowing me, that sounds like me, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So, but in the meantime, I'd found this shop, this guitar shop. It was called the Base Centre. It was over in East London. It was in Wapping. And it was like Aladdin's cave. It was this really weird little door next to a tube station, and you'd go in, and it was like the TARDIS. It was just huge in there, wall-to-wall bass guitars, really specific, just bass guitars, nothing else, and amplifiers and all the rest of it. And I made a couple of friends in there, and within a couple of weeks, I'd been offered a job because I was a bit of a bass nerd, as Rich will attest to being as well. And I thought, well, I can either, try and catch up on this university course over in West London, or I can jump into this shop where there were real professional bass players were in there every single day. I met, within the first couple of weeks, I'd met Norman Watroy from the Blockheads. I'd met Pino Palladino, who's he's like session Jesus. He's incredible. And I'd met a bunch of people that were working at the level that I wanted to work at, and I was hanging out with them and trading licks with them, learning things from them. So I thought I'll go and work in this shop. So again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend applying to university, getting the student loan, and then not getting the degree. But this was my route, and I ended up in the shop. Again, learning things from different people, and then they put me in touch with agents. So again, because the TV shows were around, everybody was always looking for younger bass players to come and do mimes, come and do playbacks on Top of the Pops. Spoiler alert: not all TV shows are live playing. So it sort of ballooned from there. I got to know loads of different bass players from there.
So when you're working in the shop, Jimmy, did that, obviously mixing with some of these great players and the people that Jimmy's mentioned, I really strongly suggest you check out some of their work, actually, because they are the sort of staples, aren't they, of the industry. Huge. Did that sort of inspire you? Did you realise then that trading licks with them, you must have just thought, wow, I've got to really up my game here, and you must have learned so much from them, and having those conversations, is that what sort of said, right, this is definitely the journey I'm going on now?
So it was a few things. So it was like meeting the super pros was unbelievable, and like being able to get their advice and all the rest of it was incredible. And just listen to them play, because as much as like people play great on records and everything, if you sit down and watch somebody actually just really shred on when they're trying out a guitar or something, it can be, it's dead exciting. It's amazing what people can do. But also it was meeting people who weren't necessarily famous, but were making a living, right? I never realized that there were people making really good livings, just playing weddings or just playing in covers bands, or the West End players who you never see were making decent money. You know, there were so many different avenues and ways that I could be a bass player and ways that I could be a musician. Songwriters would come in, producers would come in. It sort of blew my mind that I could earn a living doing a bunch of other stuff. The other lesson that I got that I found interesting was, and in fact, I'll pick up a bass and I'll do exactly the same lesson. There was this guy, Nathan East, who
Eric Clapton's bass player. Yeah.
Eric Clapton's bass player. And I said, and it was like, he sat down and I said, what's your best licks? Come on, really show off. And he goes, do you want to know my absolute best licks? It goes like this: $10, $20, $30, $40. And it's like, it doesn't matter how many notes you're playing, you're earning money. And it was earning money through music, and you're making a living through music. I found that fascinating. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, he's a good guy, Nathan East, actually. Again, and a fantastic player, and a very, very successful MD now, of course, as well, isn't he?
Absolutely.
So again, just stressing to the students, really, as Jimmy's rightly said, you don't have to be famous to make a good living from being a musician, wherever you might be. It might be, as like you said, playing in a covers band. It might be supporting people. It might be doing some recording work. You know, it's very few of us actually get to the level where you're known in your own right. But obviously, Jimmy, if just let's some of the students know. So, you know, you got these contacts. Can you remember your sort of first, you know, gig as such, in terms of, you know, getting that call to go and do a session and a few of those? Who have you sort of started to work with that sort of helped sort of, you know?
So I can trace everything. I can trace everything back to the very first call I got from an agent was to do a mime, right? Which, you know, like it or not like it, is part of the job. It was a mime for Gareth Gates, who the young ones probably won't know, but he was one of the first. I don't know if he won or he came second in one of the first sort of X Factor pop idol things. This would have been 2002.
Yeah, he was running up to Will Young, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. And it was to do a mime for him, right, at the Smash Hits poll winners party, which was it was a big deal 20 years ago. And I got put in with a bunch of other musicians I didn't know. And there was a guitar player who was doing sessions for this band. And I got on really well with him. And maybe 6 months later, he phoned me up and said, do you want to come and do, I've got a couple of sessions down at Island Records used to have a studio in Chiswick, which is West London. And it was like, they called it the Bunker. I think it might have been an air raid shelter or something at one point, but now it was this studio where, you know, I think Bob Marley and the Wailers had recorded there back in the day and whatnot. Right. And he said, do you want to come down and do these sessions? You know, and the weird thing about it is, because we've been miming together, I realised now that he'd never actually heard me play. But he knew that I was saying I could do it, and he knew that we got on all right. So it was like, all right, fine. So I went and spent a few days down there. This, again, probably would have been about 2003. A couple of days down there doing, and that was my first proper, what I would term proper recording session, you know, in a record label owned studio. Wow. And that felt great.
Yeah. And then obviously, you know, from there on, things started to move on for you. I'm just going to grab the book here, because I just thought while we're sort of hitting, you know, just before you start talking about who you've sort of worked with and how you've dealt with audition, there's a couple of questions that have come in from some students that I just thought I'd share with
you.
Some of them we might have covered, but as they've asked, we'll sort of just reiterate. What advice would you give someone looking to pursue a career in music, and especially from a bass player point of view? Because obviously we're quite limited in terms of what we do as bass players, aren't we? Because that's it, you know, bass players. But is there any sort of standout advice that you sort of give any of these students about how to get into a career in music? So,
I mean, really, I think I have. I've sort of said it in a way. My thing as a bass player, when I started coming in, getting work just as a bass player was becoming rare, especially in bands. You had to be a bass player that sang. So I learned to sing, and learning to sing backing vocals. So if you're a bass player, then great. There's loads of bands, they'll all need a bass player. If you're a bass player that can sing, now suddenly you are 10 times more valuable, if not more, because everybody wants backing vocals. I think these days as well, since I've been touring, it's been more and more the case that people want a bass player that sings and plays a bit of keyboards. They want a little bit of synth bass. So it's just about broadening your palette and being able to do, you know, as many different things as you possibly can. I mean, you see the double bass behind me. I've got that. I've taught myself guitar. Yeah, like I say, keyboards, singing. It's the more that you can bring to the table, the rarer you'll be. Make yourself the unicorn. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And again, it's really good advice that the more skills that you can develop, I think what you've just said about becoming invaluable and being able to bring something different to the table is what's going to set you apart. Just looking at the chat, had a really good one from young Emerson, who's actually a bass player, year 8 bass player at Langley Secondary School. Jimmy, who are your biggest influences as a bass player?
Richard Jones, without a shadow of a doubt.
I'll pay you that 20 quid later.
No, I tell you what, right? You say that, right? But there was one particular lesson. I think it might have even been my first or second lesson. I wandered in and I'd heard this thing where, oh, you play finger per fret. So I'd heard this. So I'm sitting there with my fingers splayed out, really trying to get a major scale or really trying to get octaves like this, you know, playing with. And you looked at me, and I, you know, I'll paraphrase you. Looked at me like, what on earth are you doing with your hand? Like, move it back down. It's about economy of movement. Why don't you try and, you know, you can play instead. That was it. I was doing octaves with my first and third, and he's like, why don't you use your little finger? It's right there, you know. And it's so stuff like that. You were a huge influence. You remain a huge influence. Influences on me. So one of my favourite bass players of all time is a guy called Leland Sklar, which is a weird name, isn't it? And he's a weird-looking dude as well. He's a proper old hippie. I think he's about 72 now. He's got a massive white beard. Looks like Santa Claus. A massive white beard and long white hair. He started out playing for James Taylor, like in the late 60s, early 70s. And he was brilliant at that, and it was wonderful songwriting music. You listen to his parts; they're really lyrical, super simple but beautiful. And then he played on this record by Billy Cobham, who's a jazz funk fusion drummer, and it's one of the most sampled bass lines of all time. Spectrum is the record, Stratus is the song. Incredible. Then he went through the 80s. He was playing for Phil Collins and all sorts of different people like that, and you know, really got to the top of his game. He's one of the most recorded bass players of all time, and yeah, I mean, he's fantastic. He's one of my huge recommendations. Go and check out his back catalogue. Trying to think of growing up, I loved Larry Graham as well. Larry Graham invented slap bass, yeah. And it's not just the sort of technical stuff that he's doing. You listen to him, and it's a little bit like there's better bass players out there who've taken it better, but you can hear the joy in what he's doing. It's almost like just going around his head of just the words going, I'm so happy, you know, whilst he's playing. So it's wonderful to hear. I like anybody where you can hear a bit of personality, man.
Yeah, and again, I think that's really important, isn't it? If you, in terms of setting your standard and being that sort of that little bit of extra that gets you that work is having that personality that comes through your instrument. Totally. Just another question that's just come in, just while it's here. What do you think of Victor Wooten?
Victor Wooten,
Maxton.
What do I think of Victor Wooten? Yeah, he's great. He's incredible at what he does. He is incredible, and he speaks a lot of sense as well. If you listen to his lessons, he did a great. I heard a great quote from him the other day talking about music theory, and he was like, he was going, music theory is like the toolbox in the back of the car. What you really want to be doing is just driving along the road, not really thinking about anything, and just you know, or just playing and not thinking about anything and just expressing yourself. But music theory is there if you break down. Music theory is there if you get stuck. So he's improvising, he's playing, he's being lyrical, but he's only ever thinking with his toolbox. He's only ever using his toolbox if he gets stuck. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important.
He's not a bass player that I listen to that much, but I respect what he does. Yeah.
No, thanks, Jimmy. No, and just sort of before we sort of share another clip with everyone, just again, it's come out quite a big theme, but obviously some of the artists, which I'll ask you to sort of name drop in a minute, which I know you've got.
No worries. I love it.
How do you cope with nerves when you get called to these auditions? I mean, last time I met you in London when we were taking the kids down to Disney at the Albert Hall, you just I think you were doing an audition with Kylie Minogue, I think, or something at the time, or you just
maybe, yeah. I think it might have been Miles Kane.
Oh, Miles Kane, yeah, even better. I like him. How do you sort of, what advice would you give to students again when you get called to do these sessions? And you know, you're working with some really big artists now. Is there sort of any advice that you can sort of share from your point of view when you get sort of stuck in that room and people are having to listen to you and you're having to gel with other players? How do you sort of make it work? How do you make the magic work?
Right. For one thing, I'm not that good at auditions, right? I don't consider myself brilliant at auditions. But I think it wasn't, I was awful at auditions until I had to audition other people, right? And I had to audition drummers for that band Rushmore. This would have been like 2007. And we're all stood around, and the band are all stood around in the room beforehand. And I went, I'm feeling really nervous. And everybody else in the room went, yeah, I'm feeling really nervous too. It's going to be weird. What you've got to remember going into an audition is it's nerve-wracking for the other people as well. Does that make sense? So that sort of made me feel a little bit like next time I went into an audition room, I started going, well, they're going to be just as nervous as I am. So, and that kind of lessened it a little bit, if that makes sense. But again, it's one of those things, the more you do it, it's like gigs, man. Like, I don't really get nervous at gigs anymore, but, well, I say that. I mean, I'm done a gig in about a year. God knows what I'm going to be like. But the more you do it, the more you get used to it. Do you know what I mean?
And as you say, the more natural it becomes, the more your personality comes out through the playing, and you're not worrying about it comes back to being prepared. It's knowing your stuff, isn't it? And all that kind of thing. So all that's in the back of the car, like you said. And when you're out there, you know your stuff, and you can actually, you know, sort of present yourself in that way. And just like I say, before we go to another clip, and then we'll just talk about the future and things. Do you want to just let some of the students know who you've sort of been touring with and who you've played with over the last sort of 10 years?
Absolutely. Okay.
And is there anyone that you sort of really enjoyed working with from that point of view? I won't use to name and shame the horrible ones.
Do you know what? I've been very lucky. I have toured with very few artists that I've not liked. I've definitely done it because, you know, you don't like everybody. But so I started out. This is a weird thing. I'm going to start name dropping, but then these kids are young enough, or a lot of the people are young enough that they probably won't know anybody that I'm name dropping. So the first time I was on a tour bus would have been 2008. Was with a girl band called the Saturdays. So I started with them, and then I went out with a girl called Amy MacDonald, who's a Scottish singer-songwriter who's just had an album out. Then I was with a guy called Mika, who you saw the middle clip when I had all the makeup on. That was Mika. That clip was from Brazil, actually. I put it in there because it was the biggest projection screen. I was playing in the middle of the biggest projection screen in the world at some point, anyway. But yeah, went out with Mika. So spent a couple of years with Shane from Westlife. Then did George Ezra for a couple of years. Brian Ferry, who you definitely won't know, but your parents might, who was a lot of fun to work for. I've never worked so hard in my life. I mean, we're talking with Brian, it was sound check would start at 1 in the afternoon and wouldn't finish till 6.
Wow.
And then you would be doing a show from 9 till 11. So it was a heavy day, man. It was a long, long day, and things would change all the time. Who else I've been working for? More recently, I've worked with Dido, who again you saw in the clip. I've been touring with her. Yeah, that's probably it for sort of big name. Did Girls Aloud for a bit, you know, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, amazing. Okay, folks, I'm just going to share my screen again, and we'll just share a clip of Jimmy in action. This is from BBC Sounds, I think, isn't it? If my memory serves.
It's a live lounge.
Yeah, live lounge. That's right. And then we'll come back and just talk about the future. And there's a couple more questions we'll throw at Jimmy. So just bear with me a minute, and hopefully this should work.
Changes and fear. When will they go from here? When will they stop? I believe the fate has brought us here. We should be together, babe, but we're not. I play down, but I'm dreaming of you. I keep my cool, but I'm feeling. Try to say goodbye, not show. Try to walk away, I stumble. Or try to hide it. It's clear my world crumbles when you are not near. Goodbye, and not show. Try to walk away, I stumble. Or try to hide it. It's clear my world crumbles when you are not near. I may appear to be free, but I'm just a prisoner of your love. I may seem alright and smile when you leave, but my smiles are just the front, just the front. I play it off that I'm dreaming of you. I'll keep my cool, but I'm feeling. Try to say goodbye and not show. Try to walk away and I stumble. Though I try to hide it, it's clear my world crumbles when you are not near. Goodbye and not show. Try to walk away and I stumble. Though I try to hide it, it's clear my world crumbles when you are not near. Here is my confession. May I be your possession. Girl, I need your touch. Your love kisses and such. With all my mind I try, but this I can't deny. I play it off that I'm dreaming of you. I'll keep my cool, but I'm feeling. Try to say goodbye and I show. Try to walk away and I stumble. Though I try to hide it, it's clear my world crumbles when you are not near. Goodbye and I show. Try to walk away and I stumble. Though I try to hide it, it's clear my world crumbles when you are not near. Goodbye and I show. Try to walk away and I stumble. Though I try to hide it, it's clear my world crumbles when you are not near. Goodbye and I show. Try to walk away and I stumble. Though I try to hide it, it's clear my world crumbles when you are not near.
Fantastic. So well done, Jimmy. Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you.
So was that done during lockdown? Because that seems to be social distancing going on there.
No, that was actually 2015.
Wow.
Yeah, tell by the length of my beard. It's what's funny about that clip is well, two things. One, really teachable moment, right? One of the lessons I had from, I can't remember who, but it was learn to be able to play with a really terrible sound, right? Because with your monitors in your ears, in my headphones, it's not always going to be the perfect sound. It's not always going to be perfectly comfortable. Everything's perfectly balanced. But the time limit means you've got to perform at that point. Going and playing at the BBC at times is like pulling teeth because the sound engineer, you know, don't quote me on this because I'll get a slagging, but the sound engineers might not necessarily know exactly what they're doing. So I can tell you, playing that, I didn't have a clue what was going on. I don't think I could hear the drums properly in my headphones. And yeah, so learn how to play when you're uncomfortable is the best way. And the other thing that was, so with George, I'd got a call on a Friday for a tour starting on the Monday, and they were saying we can have a rehearsal on Sunday night, but you need to learn the set. Our bass player's pulled out.
Wow.
So having to, and that was probably that live lounge would have been the week after. So I was very much new in there. So being able to, this is why, you know, a lot of my practice that I do, I just sit and learn songs quickly as fast as I can, and then try and play them out, you know, and it's great practice to be able to just pick up and go like that.
Yeah, and again, that's really a fantastic story, and you know, to be able to learn a whole set in literally a weekend, you know.
I'm not telling you how good I was.
No, but I'm just saying
I was awful.
Really good, it's really good skills to have, isn't it? You know,
yes.
and the idea of practicing and just learning songs over and over, that memory recall and being able to sort of play anything is really, really important. So just before we get on to the future, Jimmy, and just sort of thinking about wrapping this up, just another couple of questions. This is Emerson again. What is your favourite bass to use?
At the moment, I'll generally reach for a precision bass. So I've got a couple of precision basses. This is my, it's a 1972 precision bass that I particularly like. I'd probably just, you know, reach for that. But funnily enough, I was talking to Rich before we got on here, and I've got this weird thing here, which is an old 60s bass called an Hispania, which I've probably used and recorded with more than anything else. Producers seem to like it because it's a bit different. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, all sorts, but it changes all the time. Like I say, I'm a bit of a bass nerd, and I like instruments, so you know, it's fun to change it up.
So Emerson, Fender Precision bass, that's what you need to aim for. Okay.
Yeah. You got
Jimmy, like I say, thank you for your time today, and it's been great catching up, and I hope everyone sort of enjoyed, and obviously we can record this and play it back to people, obviously the journey that you've been on, and just reminding students, like I say, you're looking at the future generation. We need these kids to get cracking, get their instruments out, get practicing, and start filling those gaps that are going to inevitably be there afterwards. What's the future holding for yourself, Jimmy? Because obviously you've just said you haven't had a gig for a year. Have you had to sort of branch out and different things to get some income in? Have you started doing some more writing and
that's it? It's writing and producing for me. So I started co-writing with some people that I work for. So Amy McDonald and a guy called Jamie Lawson. And a guy called Newton Faulkner as well. Just started branching out and started writing things. This would have been about 5 years ago, and luckily for me, I've managed to get a certain amount of income through that, and I can do a lot of that from home. So you can see I've got sort of home setup amps and stuff, and a little I'll show you a little so just, you know, my laptop, my interface, some speakers, a couple of keyboards and things like that. So just to sit and write with. So a lot of it's been writing for me, bits of production work. And funnily enough, I've set myself up and been getting a few, there's not a lot, but a few sort of remote recording sessions. You can see my amp setups back here. I've got a few different amp choices and microphone choices and things like that to send people stuff. So it's about trying to just adapt and work a bit remotely, but also, you know, just trying to stay busy is the main thing for me.
And again, I think one of the things that's come out of all these sessions for our students is that it's not, yes, you know, you can go along on a journey and earn your living playing bass, touring, which is fab, but also having one eye on things that you know, who would have predicted this pandemic a year ago? You've got to be able to sort of dive into something else. And obviously I know about your songwriting. So I think, again, for our students, I think it's really important just to be aware that the more skills you have and the more areas you can branch out into, the more
100%.
like a spider, isn't it? You know, one leg gets chopped off, you've got another leg to bring the income in. And I think, you know, you've just got to be very aware of that, but going into a musician's world, that the more skills and the more branches you have to your tree, I think the more successful you're going to be, isn't it? I think.
But
So.
also, it'll inform so many. You know, my songwriting's definitely informed my bass playing. I'm definitely a more considerate bass player now to other people's songs than I was before I started doing that. So it all informs other parts of your musicianship.
Yeah, brilliant. And have you had any sort of calls? Are things starting to pick up now for yourself in terms of, have you done any sessions or?
So yeah, I've had luckily enough, I spent a couple of weeks in the studio, in a studio a couple of weeks ago. I've been producing a song for a couple of friends. I've got some writing stuff to do. That's all good. And then there's actually gigs getting booked in. I mean, so far that I know of, there's like a maybe something in July, maybe there's a maybe in September. There's a pretty firm definite in October. And then, I mean, people are looking at next year. I mean, this time next year, I think April next year, there's at least 2 artists that I work for that are looking to go out on fairly big tours. So fingers crossed, man, fingers crossed it happens, you know?
Brilliant. Thank you, Jimmy. So I think, again, you know, a massive thank you for Jimmy for giving up his time. Again, I'm very, of everyone we've seen, like I say, I was looking forward to this with my bass playing geek on, but
yeah, man,
it's just the you know, the journey you've been on, and to be able to relate it back to these students from Solihull, I think is really, really important. So, you know, you could be in 20 years time sitting where Jimmy is, hopefully talking to the next generation of students. And that's what we want to try and create.
You're not going to be sitting in my house for the record. It'll be a different house.
Yes, I wouldn't imagine they'll be sitting in your house. But also, I think the key things, again, that have come out of all these things, if you're going to get on in and making a successful career in music, and it is a very viable career path, is you've got to be prepared. You've got to work hard. You've got to put yourself out there, trying different things. I think Jimmy will also sort of reiterate, you've got to be nice. You've got to get
my God.
People. You know, if you don't have social skills and you turn up to an audition and you can't communicate to people, you've got no chance. And
absolutely,
egos have got to be left at the door, and you've got to work with people, because, you know, you could end up spending a year doing a year-long tour with people, and if you can't get on with people, you're not going to get that gig again. So all these themes are very, very current throughout all of these things. So, you know, be prepared, get out, play, try things that are different, learn to communicate, get on with people. And you know, one of the things Jimmy's hinted at with his practice as well, when you're practicing your bass or whatever instrument you might be here with, learn to play loads of different styles, different songs, you know, have that memory bank. So if you do get called for an audition for a band or a session or whatever it might be, that you know it's inside out and you can play it and you can adapt to it. And I think those, if you can sort of put those into your sort of everyday thoughts and moving forward, you're going to go a long way.
It's about musical vocabulary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huge musical vocabulary.
So the more you expose yourself to, the more you absorb. And I think that's really, really important. So on that note, Jimmy, thank you so much for everything. It's great to see you. And I have cleaned off my 5-string fretless that you snotted over with your cold when you were 15 years old in the Langley practice room. So it's still playing. But thank you everybody else as well for joining us. We hope you found that useful. And like I say, you can watch this back anyway. But and we're going to be keeping in touch with Jimmy over the next sort of few years anyway, months and whatever. So we're hoping to sort of maybe do something with him next year as well. So keep in touch, everyone. Get your instruments out. The recovery is coming, so just be ready. Be ready. Don't wait. Get working. And like I say, I want to make sure when we get out of this, we as Solihull musicians are going to hit the ground running and leave everybody else well behind. Okay, Jimmy, have a great day. Thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks everybody.